everybody. Welcome to Engineering at Scale at AppNexus. You are in the AppNexus Razzle space, which is also home to such events as fireside chats, chicken McNugget eating contests between engineers and recruiting managers, strategy all hands where people wear shark suits, basically a world-renowned stage, not unlike Madison Square Garden. So I'm very happy to be here today. Glad to see you guys here as well. I have the honor, some would say dubious honor, of introducing a man who could fire me for a bad introduction. Please don't fire me. Brian O'Kelly, I'm sure you all know him or can Google him and find lots of interesting things. Brian is the CEO and co-founder of AppNexus. And again, you probably know a lot of things about him already, but the reason they selected me to talk about him is to tell you some things that you might not know. So you probably know that he is a visionary in the ad tech space, an innovator who built the first ad exchange system as CTO of Bright Media. What you might not know is he is also an innovator in the karaoke space, where he invents words to songs, even though the words to the songs are right behind him on the television screen. At least he's sort of in key. You might know that he graduated from Princeton with a CS degree and also played varsity basketball at Princeton. You might not know that at the NBA Finals, Game 5, Celtics versus the Lakers, he was fixing a production problem in the seats and got it pushed out and fixed before the game was over. It's pretty badass. I was right there. I was like, I'm going to watch the game because Kobe is on fire, but you know, do your thing, boss. What else might you know? You might know that he develops a lot of really awesome things. He built a large part of the ad server here, a large part of the server-side cookie store, all these awesome real-time platforms. You might not know that he built a handler for me to check in when I'm in the office because I was too short to be seen over my monitor and he would not know that I was there. Gosh, you know, I think there's a lot more things that I could tell you, except it would be too incriminating. So let me cut this short and let me get him to talking about the 3 big failures and 1 big success of his tech startup career.
Oh, thank you. I'll start by apologizing that I'm a little sick today. So if I sound like I have a frog in my nose, I might. Tivu, thank you very much. Tivu was not telling you that a few weeks ago, she called me into her office and said, Brian, you're hereby fired from ever writing code at AppNexus again. I'm so tired after years and years of maintaining your crappy code, you're done. And I cried for a while. And then I started my new scheme to write code that she can't fire me from. So if you see some new products coming out of AppNexus that don't make any sense, it's probably me trying to find ways to convince Tivu to let me code. I will convince you, even if I can't pass our coding test anymore. So today I'm here to tell you basically the story, the immaculate conception of Brian O'Kelly, entrepreneur. Many of you may think, given the title, that I'm going to tell you stories about all the failures that led to the great successes we've had. And in fact, I've never made a mistake. I've never failed. I'm up here because my code always compiles, never had a bug, and I'm just trying my job back, really. But we'll get there. No, that's not true. The truth is that my path to being an entrepreneur has been long and winding and pretty much a constant failure marked by the occasional success. And I thought it might be fun to share that path and talk about some of the things I learned along the way. Because really it's the learnings from failing, the obstacles that we've overcome that makes people great. And I thought it might be either inspiring or at least amusing to hear about how I got from there to here. So where's there? I grew up in Oregon. I'm a Duck fan. And no quacking. I'm surprised. Thank you. Gosh, at least somebody here. And I went to Princeton, as Tivu mentioned. And but as a senior in high school, I was fortunate because I had a computer at my house. And this is back in the old days when not everyone had a PC. And I had a Mac. I was very proud of that. And but many of my classmates didn't have these. And our entire school district had Apple II computers. This is probably ancient technology for all of you, but they were pretty cool. And the district decided to upgrade all of the apples to Macs. And I made the naive question of one of the administrators, why don't we just give all the old crappy Apple IIs to the families who don't have computers at home? And they laughed at me and said, we're not a nonprofit. You know, well, you're a school district. What are you? They couldn't answer that question, actually. And they said, no, but we'll sell them to you, Brian, for $5 a pop. And I thought to myself, you know, this is my first entrepreneurial moment. I was a philanthropist for about 10 minutes, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, you know, I tried, all right? And so just to give you a sense of the level of intelligence of the Eugene, Oregon School District, they lent me, at the age of like 17, a van and said, if you can get them out of our warehouse in the next couple of days, you know, we'll be happy to be done with them. We'll even loan you the, you know, couple $1,000s to get rid of them. So they wouldn't donate them, but they would lend me a van and give me $2,000 to go buy the computers from them, which to this day has to be one of the best business deals I've ever cut, right? So I convinced a buddy that he should get his parents to move their boat out of his garage, and we moved 400 or 500 of these computers into the garage, and we were entrepreneurs. And after basketball practice every day, 5 or 6 of us would go there, scrape all the nasty tape and kid fingerprints off these things, and sell them for $100 out of the garage. Good margin. One day, a guy pulled up in a van, pulling a trailer, and said, I'll buy the rest. And so we sold all of these computers for like $15,000. And I felt guilty because, and this is again, we're over this now, but I felt guilty at the time because I was like, wow, they loaned me $2,000, gave me the computers, and I sold them for 15 grand. So we took half the profit and donated it back to the school district to pay for our own high school graduation, which was pretty cool. And we set up a scholarship fund, which the next year student government immediately squandered, which is pretty much what government does, I now know. Whatever you set aside, they will spend next year. But, you know, one of many learnings I will share with you today. But that was how I became an entrepreneur. And 2 of us, a guy named Pat McCarthy and I, took our share of the earnings and started a web development firm. And it was called IceWeb, which stands for Innovative Computer Enterprises. And it was one of the most successful web development companies of 1995. There were about 10 of these companies. I know this because on the homepage of Netscape.com, many of you may remember Netscape, the company of that time, it listed the 10 most important companies on the web. And it was like HP, IBM, IceWeb. And I was like, that's awesome. You know, Yahoo had a magazine. This is back when the internet was like magazines. Like, you'd build a website and they'd print a magazine about it. And Yahoo had like a full-page spread highlighting innovative computer enterprises. And of course, Pat and I were like, this is stupid. Who's Yahoo? And we threw it away. All right? And we still, to this day, don't have a copy of this magazine. So if any of you has like an old stack of like, you know, Mad magazines and Yahoo Internet Life magazines, grab the issue from like sometime in '95. We'd love to have it. We'll pay you a couple bucks for it. But we just had no idea that the internet mattered. And we were selling websites to law firms. We'd walk in and say, hey, would you like a website? They're like, yeah, www, man. That sounds awesome. You know, what is it? We're like, okay, first of all, 3 W's, okay? Second of all, do you have a computer? And most of them did not have computers. But it was kind of a great business because no one understood what the heck we did. The standard for graphics was none. So if you just had no graphics, people were like, wow, that's cutting edge. I didn't bring some pictures, but if you go back into the Wayback Machine and look at you know, iceweb.com, you'll be amazed. Gray backgrounds, sometimes blue links, pretty cool, and we had animated GIFs, which today actually sounds really cool. But for most of the last 15 years, if you said we had animated GIFs, you'd be like, that's really skanky-rinky. But now, like, it's cool. Animated GIFs are back, and we started the revolution back in 1995. So I was actually cool. We built some open source e-commerce software. There was no open source at that time. It was just you gave it away because it was crappy. But like 100 sites were using our e-commerce engine, which would email you in an unsecure way the result of the unsecure form that you filled out. And we were selling helicopter parts and stuff. It was really kind of cool. And of course, I CC'd myself in all the orders. So I'd get my email account like, so-and-so ordered, here's his credit card number, here's, I mean, there's people just emailing me. And it turned out in hindsight, like that was actually a security hole. I didn't tell people that it had a blind CC to me. So hundreds of people were like sending me email like, hey, here's my credit card. But I never stole anyone's money, as far as you know. So it was good. So I went to Princeton. Pat stayed in Oregon and went to the U of O, which in hindsight, from a football perspective, made a lot of sense. And I went and started taking computer science classes. But I'd already done enough computer science on my own, building these little hacky scripts, that I found it to be a really good way to make even more money on the side after class. And why everyone was not a computer science major bewildered me. You have relatively easy classes, few of them, and everything you learn makes you actual money versus everything else at Princeton. Princeton does nothing practical. Name one practical major at Princeton. English, no. Political science, no. Chemical engineering, no. What can you make in your dorm room that, oh no, you could use things in chemical engineering. I take that back. But that's illegal, okay? Everything except for that is probably useless. So I felt like that was a very practical major. And we kept making websites out of our dorm room. And the technology advanced very quickly from 95 to, say, 98. We went from gray screens with blue links to tables to graphics to things. I mean, it wasn't really that much advancement, just prettier and prettier websites. But the internet as a whole exploded. By 99, when I graduated from Princeton, everyone was starting websites that were crazy. We had pets.com, we had mp3.com, which in hindsight was a great business. It was basically iTunes without any money, but it was awesome, now known as MySpace. So all these businesses are exploding, and a few buddies and I said, why don't we start a business just like these ones? Because they're all 100 millionaires, and we're not. What can they do that we can't do? And so this sort of entrepreneurial bent started in probably the fall of 98. Now, I'm going to tell you the story. Now, this idea may still be a good idea today. I don't want anyone here stealing our ideas or technology, even 14 years later. Everyone agree? Here was the idea we started with. Anna Nicole Smith needs a website. What do you think? That's not porn, okay? This was legit, all right? People will pay money to look at Anna Nicole Smith on a website. This is a great business. Okay, we did not do that business, but I still think today this could be a great business. So don't take that idea. It's still in my back pocket. But what we ended up doing was, a much less profitable idea, which was, hey, it's 1998, and the only way to buy tickets to a concert is to pick up the phone and call Ticketmaster and pay all your money. And obviously today that's not the case. Is that right? Ticketmaster now not all your money? Nope, still all your money. So you can tell our business failed because our whole idea was, instead of using the phone to call Ticketmaster and pay all your money, why don't we do it on the internet and make it relatively cheap? Sort of a simple idea. And I cannot believe that no one's actually done this idea even today. So that just gives you a sense of how far we've come. So what you have to do to build a real e-commerce site out of your dorm room is, one, figure out how to do e-commerce, which actually was a very difficult problem back in 99 because most of the technology didn't exist. You couldn't grab OpenSSL to do SSL. You kind of had to go grab the RFC for SSL and hack it yourself, or just find a way to fake the little icon that says you're secure. But no one did that back then, I'm sure. But going through the simple mechanics, what for us today seem really easy, back then a shopping cart was very complicated. The logistics of, how many tickets do we have to sell? We have 100. How do we get those to, sell to the first person who comes to the site? What if 20 people come to the site at the same time? Are we going to go down? I had like a, 300 megahertz computer on my desk, and it was super fast back then. So 20 visitors was a lot in 99. People on modems, okay? These things were fast. They're like 56,000 baud. These things can fly. Like, we've got to be ready for the incredible traffic coming in. And who better to build this kind of site than 7 computer science seniors at Princeton who really know nothing about databases, about, real programming like software engineering. Princeton doesn't teach you software engineering. Princeton teaches you algorithms. So if you wanted the big O notation, big O, go Ducks. If you want the big O notation for like an e-commerce site, I could probably write you the algorithm. It's O of N, A plus, right? But how to actually do that? None of us had ever actually used a database. MySQL, anyone here use MySQL? MySQL was at 1.0. What this meant was you could not use transactions. which is not a very good thing for an e-commerce site. You couldn't use any kind of stored procedures. You couldn't use any useful database mechanism. All you could do was select. Maybe updates would work, right? There was no clustering. There was no in-memory because memory was like, 2 megs. So fundamentally, all of this infrastructure we're so used to didn't exist. Anyone know what the cloud was called back in 1999? Nobody? It wasn't called anything. It didn't exist. There was no cloud. You had to literally go buy servers and put them somewhere. And you couldn't get any kind of leverage. Maybe you could do some kind of hosting from a rack space or something like that. But none of the infrastructure we're used to today existed. So for 7 kids in a dorm room at Princeton to first of all say, we can build an e-commerce site, that sounded crazy. That's like someone saying, I'm going to build a search engine out of my dorm room today. It just sounds like wild. Probably in 10 years, people would be like, yeah, why can't you build a search engine from your dorm room? But today, that's sort of hard. Back then, that's how hard e-commerce was. Then there's this minor problem of how do you get tickets? Like, how do you go get people to give you tickets to sell? So one of our partners said, well, instead of going to Anna Nicole Smith and building her website, why don't we spend that same effort and go to every club in LA and get them to give us tickets for all their really cool events? That seemed like a great idea. Why wouldn't they give us tickets? It's the internet. Everyone's on the internet. So by the time we graduated from Princeton, we'd raised $500,000 of money from friends and family, okay? Our parents, our neighbors, the guy across the hall's mom. We're going to be billionaires. So you got to give us your money. And we flew out the day after graduation, after having worked night and day for 4 or 5 months, and we set up shop in LA on Wilshire Boulevard. And so the day after graduating Princeton, we had something like 15 employees. A few weeks later, we had 30 employees. I was the youngest person in the company. I was 21 years old, the CEO of a massive internet company, and our goal to do this huge launch was to finish this platform, line up all of these tickets, run a huge marketing blitz, okay? Hire a bunch of writers from Vanity Fair and Rolling Stone, build incredible content about the best venues, call every club in LA and find out every listing, go do a business development partnership with Sidewalk.com, one of the biggest local portals, and get them to advertise all of these events. And by the way, do all of this in 6 weeks. That was our plan, because that's all the money we had. If we couldn't do all of those things in 6 weeks, we'd go out of business. And so, we did it. We actually, by not sleeping, and by the way, I don't mean to brag, but we were paying ourselves $18,000 a year, which in LA at that time bought you nothing. 2 of us shared an ant hotel. There was a stream of ants running up the stairs that was about this thick. And in LA, the ants can basically eat you. And there were carjackings outside, which was, kind of cool because we didn't have a car. I rode my bike around. You're not afraid of a carjacking if you ride a bike, right? It's kind of a great way to sort of save that fear and insurance money. So I'd ride my bike in LA to work. Anyone from LA here? Anyone ride a bike in LA? No. See, it turns out I'm the only idiot who would try to ride a bike in LA. People would swerve off the streets to try to hit me. And they would yell out the window, just trying to do you a favor, put you out of your misery. No one rides bikes there. So the whole problem of this business was we're working our butts off. What do you think our revenue model was? It's the same as Ticketmaster's. Get a little bit of money for every ticket you sell. Now, we were out at all these venues. We'd show up at the Hollywood Bowl, 15,000-seat venue, amazing concerts, and we'd say, look, we're an online ticketing company. And they'd be like, what's this online? I'm like, okay, so there's this web thing. People are going to go online and buy tickets. And they're like, first of all, who's online? I don't know anybody who's online. No one goes online, and they're sure not going to give you their credit card information. Haven't you heard about the guys who were stealing credit cards? Wait, no, I've never heard about that. No one's ever done that in the history of the internet. But why would we give you tickets? So they get 5 tickets and give them to us. So we're getting $1 a ticket. Our entire revenue model would require every single ticket from every single venue. So when we launched, we're supposed to have 50,000 tickets to sell. I think we had 5 tickets to sell. So that's a minor problem. Second problem, we figured because we're going to go take Ticketmaster out, they're going to sit in their haunches and not launch online ticketing during the 9 months from when we come up with the idea and we launch. Ticketmaster apparently isn't stupid. And so they also had more money than God. So what did they do in the 9 months? They launched online ticketing. So we're calling these people and saying, hey, why don't you give us tickets? And they say, well, we just gave all of our online tickets to Ticketmaster. And we're like, what do you mean? Ticketmaster's not online. They are now. So that worked a little bit until Ticketmaster got smart and said, how about this? If you give LA Tonight a single ticket, you can't sell any tickets through our phones. Now, Hollywood Bowl has to sell 15,000 tickets a couple times a week. If they can't use the 2,000 Ticketmaster agents in Omaha to access the 80% of people in the world at that point who didn't have the internet, guess what's going to happen? They're going to say, sorry, LA Tonight, we're going to give our tickets to Ticketmaster. Thank you for calling. So we have no tickets to sell. We're making all the right conversations. They're inviting us to events. Now, this is the best part of this business, by the way. Being the CEO of a .com company in 1999, focusing on venues in LA means you get to go to any place you want. You can go to a club. I'm like, yeah, I'm the CEO of a .com company. Please come on in, have a glow stick. What's a glow stick? By the way, I didn't drink, which is a huge mistake if you're going to run a company like this. In hindsight, the one thing I would probably change is I would have had something to drink, because I still don't know what a glow stick tastes like. But you know, the whole idea of the business, if you think about it as a way to get into clubs, brilliant. As a way to make money, not so brilliant. We had a $100,000 marketing budget. What did we do? Well, we got radio. By the way, names that are good for radio, LA, the number 2, NITE.com. Our 15-second radio commercial was basically that. It was like, hey, check out LAtonight.com. Let me spell that for you. LA, the number 2, NITE.com. Oh, that was 15 seconds. So terrible name. That's like $25,000 blown on radio. Total traffic from radio, 0. Then we sponsored a concert. It was like a massive concert, the K-Duck Weenie Roast. 50,000 people. We gave out T-shirts. It was totally awesome. Incredible bands like Metallica and all these people. We had a little booth. We're handing out these T-shirts. You know what the ROI on a T-shirt is? A T-shirt costs you $10. Okay? 1 of 5 people you give a T-shirt to even knows what the hell you're advertising. So all these drunk people were like, check out my T-shirt. Of the 10,000 T-shirts we gave away, or maybe it was 5,000, like 4 people came to the site. Then there's this minor issue of we were doing all of this before we launched. So for all these people who were the radio ads, they'd come to the site and it said, come back in a week. And for the concert, they'd come and it's like, please come back in a week. So I'm kind of embarrassed to tell you how many people actually came to the site before we launched. I believe it was something like 12,000 people. So $500,000 of our angel money spent on all this process and launch. We have 5 tickets to sell. We have no advertising on the site. Everyone who was going to come to the site came before we even turned it on. And so on the day of the launch, just to make matters worse, Ticketmaster buys Sidewalk.com. So our whole biz dev strategy of partnering with the local partner in town, Ticketmaster just goes and buys them. Did I mention that we chose office space in the same office complex as Ticketmaster, on the same level as their executive floor? They kind of knew we were coming. Did I mention that we had our launch party in the courtyard right underneath them? And that Kiefer Sutherland came because he was a friend of a guy we went to college with. And he was nobody that time. He was like a soap opera guy. And that was like the highlight of the entire business. So what I'm trying to tell you is this was one of the most colossal failures of the .com era. We had no traffic. And the best part is the CEO, this idiot, was like, oh, we have no traffic. Let's give away a car. So out of desperation, with no advertising, we give away a Passat just to drive traffic to the site that has, even if they came, there's no tickets. Like, what are we doing? We gave away a $28,000 car. Only 1,000 people entered to win the car. I mean, this is $28 per entry. So brilliant strategy. We were millionaires, though, because we'd raised money at a $10 million valuation. And if you look at my 50% ownership, I had $5 million. I was a $5 millionaire a month after graduation. It was very nice to walk around thinking about that and not about everything else wrong with the business. And so we had these poor engineers working night and day trying to build the e-commerce engine. We had our writers, we had our listings people, and absolutely no revenue model. No hope for revenue model, just no hope. And so I did what a great CEO does 6 weeks after graduating college, probably 8 weeks at this point. I fly to Bermuda to our biggest investor and say, please, please, can I have more money? We really need some money. Just a couple $100,000 will do it. And because of all these great successes, she's like, well, you've done a terrible job. But compared to how bad everybody else is doing, how bad mp3.com is doing and pets.com, you look pretty good. You might be my best portfolio company right now. So the most important lesson of my story is make sure everyone else is so bad around you that you look good when you're terrible. And so she gave us the money for some reason. Still no idea why. She was Canadian. That might have something to do with it. And then I flew to New York. And there's a company here in New York called Club Planet. You've probably seen their little banners hanging in all the light poles over the last few years. And I go into the Club Planet offices, which are right down the street. And I said, look, you guys should buy us. We're like the LA version of Club Planet, except we have e-commerce software, and we have all these amazing Princeton kids building software, and our team is amazing, and we have all this investor interest, and we're worth millions of dollars. And the guys say, okay, fine, we'll buy you for $3 or $4 million. I forget what it was, $3.5 million. Real money. And so I feel like a very good CEO at this point. I fly back on the airplane to LA. I walk back into the office to my two partners, and I say, guys, here's $250,000, which is enough to keep us alive for a few more months. And here's an offer to buy the company for $3.5 million. I'm no good at math, but I think that means that we're not paper millionaires. We could actually be millionaires. Since we have no hope whatsoever of making this business work, why don't we take the money and run, declare victory, everyone will be like, wow, you sold your startup. You'll be heroes, and then we can go work for these idiots in New York and whatever, we'll leave in a year. What do you think my friends did? My good buddies from Princeton who founded the company with me. Did we take the money? No, of course not. They fired me. I'm not kidding. They fired me. And they said, you're a terrible CEO. Brian, look at these other companies. None of them are selling for a couple $1 million. You've lost your faith. You no longer believe in the vision and mission. We can't have a leader who doesn't believe in what we're doing. You're fired. And I said, can I keep my equity? And they're like, no. None of your equity is vested. It's all going back to the company. So I finally talked them into letting my family sell their shares back to the company in return for everything I had vested. So we're now at, I think, mid-August. Graduated in June. This is now 10 weeks after graduation. I've gone from being worth $5 million on paper to being worth over $1 million in actual hard cash to being in my dad's basement, destitute. That was my summer after college. And so you could argue this was, just a fun experience. But really, it was a huge failure. We'd wasted all this money. We'd wasted a perfectly good opportunity. And as I say, even today, Ticketmaster is still ripping everyone off, for all I can tell, on tickets. The market was there. They're selling, tens of millions of dollars of tickets online. But I learned something amazing from this. And this is actually where the failure was valuable. Because I actually was able to, in a very quick period of time, didn't pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for business school, didn't have to work my way through a big organization. I was an executive at a startup, a CEO, immediately after college. And so I got handed to me a report card of everything I was terrible at in a very, very short period of time. It was a very long list. I was terrible at business plans. I was terrible at business deals. I was terrible at business. I was terrible at managing people. I was terrible at software. By the way, did I say the software never actually worked? We couldn't actually sell tickets because it turns out that writing an SSL system from scratch is kind of hard, and that 7 guys who'd never done a database or anything else weren't going to get it done. So it was a really sort of painful list of things that I didn't know how to do. But then again, sitting in my dad's basement, it was actually nice because I kind of was able to build a roadmap for what I wanted to do next. And I wanted to go find ways to get better at the things I was so bad at. And the one that kept coming back to me was managing people. That having 30 employees, some of whom were more than twice my age, was a daunting task. I didn't know how to tell them what to do. I didn't know how to hire them. They don't have interviewing classes at college. They may now because of all these incubators, but at that time, you just sort of said, okay, you seem nice, come on board. You want to run finance? Okay. Can you count? Sweet, come on. That was the interviewing path. So I really wanted to go learn some of these fundamental skills about how to be a business person. I knew I could code and write software, but I didn't know how to do anything with that. And so I was fortunate that one of the sort of alumni advisors to LA Tonight offered me a job. And he said, come work for me at my consulting firm in New Jersey, and I'll teach you everything I've learned over 10 years at Accenture. Now, consulting firm in New Jersey is apparently code for rink-a-dink startup in a doctor's office in Hoboken. So you got to be very careful, it's my advice to you, when someone says New Jersey as to what part of New Jersey. When they say consulting firm, what kind of consulting firm? But when you're living in your dad's basement, you sort of say yes to whatever you get offered. And so I show up in Hoboken, and there's no apartments. So I live on the floor of the doctor's office. Positive of doctor's office, they have showers. And those little screens you pull around yourself. So, if there's an early morning meeting, everyone's like, ignore the futon in that weird slidey thing. But it really was the best experience of my career, because here was 3 partner track folks from Accenture who were leaving Accenture to start their own firm. And in '99 and in 2000, there was a lot of these little firms, Sapient and Scient and Viant and Vapient, and they all sound the same, but they're very important businesses. But what was all these consulting people were finding startups and even big companies who wanted to hop onto the internet. And so as a consultant at that time, you got to jump into these big organizations and actually implement these new technologies. And so one of my first clients was American Express. There was a company out in the valley called RightPoint, which was eventually bought by Epiphany. And they did real-time personalization. And the idea was that when you picked up the phone and called American Express, you type in your credit card number, and it would immediately look up everything that they knew about you and script the guy on the phone or the gal on the phone to say, hey, I see that you like cruises. Would you like to take a cruise next week? $99 off. And you could actually personalize the conversation to these people. And these guys had the idea, why don't we do this for the web? When you log on to the website, American Express, why don't we do exactly the same thing and figure out what the best offers to show to the person would be? And so my job was to take this technology from Silicon Valley and integrate it into American Express, which, if you think about Amex, they have $1 billion data science group in '99, right? They have a huge investment in big data. And this was real big data. Tens and tens of millions of card members, thousands of data points each, huge models. And this was the kind of big data we think about now, back in the future, right? This is the old way of doing it. And so for me, as a kid, I was 22 years old, going into the World Financial Center and going and meeting with the marketing managers at Amex to understand what they wanted to do, flying to Phoenix, meeting with these, engineers who were building these big, complex, they weren't engineers, they were IT people. They get very offended if you call them engineers, I don't know why. But this is like an incredible experience for an entrepreneur who wants to build enterprise systems. Because at the end of the day, everything we do in the enterprise world is about penetrating these big, complex companies like Amex. If you want to sell enterprise software, you have to understand how they think, how they operate, how they integrate. They don't just say, yeah, we'll try that. Let's plug it into our database of every single person in the world and everything they've spent. No, they put you through disgustingly complicated security reviews. Stability, it has to stay up all the time forever, right? That system I built there is still live. It's called legacy software. It will never go down. It will never change. It probably still runs on the same computers in the same room in Phoenix that it ran on then. They won't even touch it. It's like holy code, because once it's in, it will always be there. But to get it in takes a huge amount of work. And for me, coming from La La Land, where you just poked a button and turned a computer on and it was on, it was an incredible experience into waterfall software development, into JAD sessions, into security reviews, into the real world of how technology actually works in the enterprise. But not just that, how the business side works. It was a cool project because I got to meet the marketing managers and hear how they thought. They just wanted people to click on their offers and sign up for cruises or better credit cards, versus the engineers who were like, who cares? I don't want to get fired because it crashes. And then calling the guys in Silicon Valley, this startup, and hearing them talk about their cool algorithms and the weird Russian guy who's writing the algorithms that no one can speak to because he's Russian, and trying to connect all these dots together. Now, at Accenture, no 22-year-old would ever have the opportunity to be involved in a project like this. It wouldn't make any sense. But at a startup consulting firm, I got to be effectively the number 2 on this project, watching this incredibly experienced woman who ran the project, one of the partners at the firm, manipulate these people. I learned how to set expectations. Manipulate is actually the right word. They would say, how long will this take? And she'd say, how long do you want it to take? It's amazing. Like, that's not the answer, But they'd say, we want it next week. She'd say, okay, what are the processes you have to run to make this happen in a week? And they'd say, well, we'd have to schedule the joint architecture session tomorrow, and we'd have to have the security session the next day. We'd have to have these 42 people review it, and we'd have to have these boxes in production. And she's like, great, if you can do your part, I'll do my part. And it was amazing. The whole company would actually do what she said to do. We would put things in place in 1/10 of the time that they'd ever put things in place because she knew how to work the system. She knew how to make them do her job for her. And I was just sitting here taking notes the whole time, watching this amazing enterprise jujitsu happen of how you get things done at a big organization. And then about 2 months into our project, she happens to mention that she's pregnant. And Amex is like, okay, well, that's cool. When are you due? And she goes, oh, tomorrow. They're like, what do you mean tomorrow? And she's like, yeah, no, I haven't been showing much. And I kid you not, she got in the plane and had the baby the next day. And so now I'm in charge of this multi-million-dollar project at American Express. So I have 2 months of on-the-job training to deliver this incredibly important project the fate of the company depends on. And so I won't say I did a great job, but it was the most incredible experience to have, millions and millions and millions of dollars and all of this pressure on me where I have to go effectively finish this project and get this crappy piece of Silicon Valley software to actually stay up long enough to pass these, reviews. I don't care if it actually works. I don't care if it stays up. It has to survive the 24-hour burn period so I can fly back to New York. And, it did. And by the way, it's still live today. This project has now produced over $1 billion of incremental profit for American Express over the past 10 years, just by choosing better offers to show people when they log in. I actually still have an American Express card just so once in a while I can log in and see what offers it gives me, because I think that's kind of funny. But I want to point this out because this wasn't a failure. It wasn't a success per se, but it was an incredible experience for me to go from millionaire to nothing to being part of a project where I learned so much so quickly. So that was really one of the most incredible experiences of my career. And I think it shows how, in some ways, the failure of LH Knight was a huge opportunity for me to go learn and be exposed to all of these things. Now, unfortunately, like all good things, it was soon to end. In 2000, we saw a lot of pressure on the dot-com market. A lot of companies started to go out of business. And by 2001, consulting firms weren't printing money anymore because everyone was pulling back. The VC fueled, raise some money, hire consultants to raise some more money, to hire more consultants, went away. The stock market started to crash, and we were forced to sell the firm. I say we. Technically, the guy who founded the firm got scared and sold it out from under us and fired me, but I prefer to think of it as we sold the firm because it makes me feel better about myself. So I was unemployed, and 2 years out of college, living in fancy Hoboken, trying to figure out what to do. And I had two choices. I had two job offers. One was to go work at this awesome Wall Street firm in the hottest technology, CDOs, credit derivatives, which were the hot thing at that time. And the firm was called Lehman Brothers. If you recall, what destroyed our economy was Lehman Brothers and CDOs. You'll be happy to know that was not my fault. I did not take that job offer. Instead, a buddy of mine was starting basically an ERP systems company in Jersey City. And this company was going to effectively take all of these old green screen financial systems and put a web interface on top of them. And we were going to sell this into CFOs. And you start to see some of the pieces come together of what I learned doing LA Tonight and at this consulting firm and how it played into starting a company. I effectively was the CEO of an internal startup at a consulting firm. My buddy had built a beta, in essence. And my job was to hire salespeople to commercialize this product and to go sell it into big enterprises. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever sold software to a CFO. It's next to impossible. CFOs are perhaps the worst customers ever. But no one told me this. And so after 6 months of development, we walked into the first CFO and said, you need to use this software. He said, will it work 100% of the time, perfectly reliably, with no errors of any sort ever? And the only possible answer to that question is, of course. which was complete falsity. But 6 months later, we'd actually built this system that could literally go in and give these guys web-based drag and drop reporting on top of their enterprise systems. That was a huge success, right? Because we'd actually built this system that could do almost anything these CFOs want. We sold $500,000 of software in those 6 months. And this is 2002, when the economy's crap, no startups are happening in New York. And so we think to ourselves, great, let's spin this thing out and make it a real business. Now, I should rewind and say, internal startup means you get paid a salary and you don't have any equity because there's a bigger company around you. So we have all this success as a company. I've learned how to sell into enterprises, how to build a support team, how to really think in an enterprise way about sales. I've read every sales book about how to do solution selling. And so, anyone guess what happens? I go to the CEO of the company, and he says, I'm never going to spin this out. I will never give you equity. Would you like a car? And I said, I must have missed a part of that sentence. I think I just built you a multi-million-dollar software company that you agreed to spin out and give me 10%, and you offered me a car. And he's like, that's right. What are you going to do about it? And so I quit in a huff. So just as a record, I got fired by my friends. I got fired by the CEO of this consulting firm, and my mentor, and then I quit in a huff from the only sort of successful company I'd built so far. So that was the first 4 years out of college. So at this point, I'm unemployed again. I'm zooming through that one because really it's a great failure because I didn't put the pieces together to actually make a real company. But imagine me in 2003. In some ways, I've had incredible experience. I've been to LA, which was in itself an incredible experience. I've raised money. I've built a couple of startups, in essence, that have been somewhat successful and had customer traction. I've delivered enterprise projects. I've been fired multiple times. I've been on unemployment, which was a big highlight of that time period. But I need a job. And so I start applying for jobs. This is now the spring of 2003. And the only thing I can get hired as is a programmer, because none of these other skills are actually tangible. None of them is something I can walk in and say, look, I've been fired a lot. It actually doesn't work well. For any of you who were at the talk we did a couple weeks ago with Matt Phillips, he was talking about how I interviewed, and he was like, no. You're overqualified and also underqualified, and I'm never going to hire you because you're like, what are you? Are you an entrepreneur? Are you a coder? Are you a good coder? No one's really sure because all you've done is run these companies. And so I literally had to find a job where someone would pay me to write code. And I did. And I was hired at this company, Write Media, as a developer. And what I'd done was taken the experience I had at this consulting firm writing real-time personalization software and said, hey, I can do this online advertising thing. It's the same idea as real-time personalization. It's just real-time advertising. Now, in 2003, there was no such thing as real-time bidding or as an online ad exchange or any of these technologies that seem commonplace today. What we had was ad servers that literally just had a big matrix, serve this ad on this site. I'm not kidding. There was actually a big checklist, huge checklist. And the trafficker would go in and check all the boxes for all the matches of the website and the creative they wanted to serve. It would actually crash the browser. And so my innovation, my very fancy innovation was, what if the computer figures that out for us? What if we use statistical prediction to say, hey, this ad works really well on that site, but not so well on that site? And this was revolutionary at the time. The only company doing that was called Poindexter Systems, right down the street, and advertising.com in Baltimore. And so for us, innovating, basically using what was, to me, old school technology that we've been doing in '99 into a new industry, into the online advertising space, was kind of fun. And the guys who founded Write Media, who I was working for as a programmer, were industry experts for online advertising. They'd been at DoubleClick, they knew how things worked, and they actually knew how to go build a real business on top of this kind of technology. And so this is the beginning of a great success. I actually turned out to be more than just a programmer for these guys. I turned out that not only could I build them an ad server, and thank you, Tivu, for your kind words, it actually worked, but I also could scale that ad server. It turns out that all that time I spent doing distributed systems at Princeton actually paid off, because when the system began to scale from 100,000 ads in January of '04 to 2 billion ads in January of '05 to 35 billion ads in January of '06, hey, a lot of those little things I learned all that O of N crap, turns out to really matter when your system's scaling hyper exponentially. A lot of the experience I had, actually all of the experience I had, began to pay off. When Right Media was 10 people, it didn't really matter if you could manage. All that mattered was could you sell and code. A year later, when we're 30 people, management starts to matter more. Some of those skills I learned as a consultant start mattering as we have bigger and bigger customers. My job wasn't just write code at that point. I actually took over business development. My job became call all of the publishers and convince them to join the Right Media ad network. Now, why would you have your programmer be the head of your business development group? Well, if he's the only guy on the team who's actually ever sold at any kind of scale before. All those tickets and all of the CFOs and everything else, all of these skills start to come to play. And so pretty soon they switched me from being a developer to being the CTO. Now, that seems like a small change, but the difference is I get to hire people. I get to invent things. I get to effectively build the business around the vision that I had. A year after I started at Right Media, I began to think, instead of being an ad network that arbitrages between buyers and sellers, what if we were a technology company? Now, this was kind of crazy. There weren't a whole lot of successful ad technology companies at that time. And by the way, being an ad network was incredibly profitable. Take a 30 to 50% cut on every ad you serve. The more you sell, the more you make. The more you make, the more you sell. It's a great business. And advertising.com got sold for $400 million in 2004, doing exactly that. Why would we want to do anything but that? But here's where all this entrepreneurial experience starts to come in. Because I could sell enterprise software, because I could build and support enterprise software, some part of me said, let's go build this. Why can't we take this system, this predictive ad system, and turn it into something we can sell to all these other companies in the ad space? And that was the future of Right Media, which was actually taking all of this stuff and building a product that we could sell as a technology company. Many of you know the future of that, and I'll probably have another session one of these days to talk about the whole Right Media story and how it plays into AppNexus. But I really want to focus on, for this conversation, is all of the failures and how they played into those successes. And I'll leave a few minutes at the end for questions if you want to ask them, but I just want to go failure, success, failure, success. Failure at Right Media was having a crappy business model. Failure at LA Tonight was crappy business model. Success at Right Media, failure at LA Tonight was bad business model. Success at Right Media was changing our business model. So we started off being an ad network, which was a very linear business. You make as much money as you sell. We ended up a technology company where you build it once and sell it 50 times. So we actually changed the business model to make it work. At LA Tonight, we were effectively constrained by huge competitors. At Right Media, we pivoted away. We said we look just like all these ad networks, but there's no one out there who's an ad exchange or a technology company. At Right Media, at LA Tonight, I was the CEO. I had no idea what I was doing. At Right Media, I was the CTO. We had somebody else who was CEO who had no idea what he was doing. Definitely the way to go is find someone else to screw it up for you. But if you go back and forth for what I learned in each of these experiences, what you realize is there's no possible way for Right Media to have been the company it was if I hadn't built enterprise companies, if I hadn't been a consultant, if we hadn't gone down the path of failing at LA Tonight. Every one of these things I learned was what made Right Media possible in the future. And in July of 2007, when Yahoo bought Right Media for $850 million, I can certainly declare success. Although I will mention I got fired from that too. So really, if you measure it by getting fired, I'm still looking for a job I don't get fired from. So far, AppNexus hasn't fired me. But I do want to close off by just saying that that is really the story of how we got to where we are today. And with that, I'll open up for questions.
How important is it that you can still program?
Well, TiVo banned me from programming. I think the truth is that as an engineer running a company, I have a unique advantage because I can walk into a sales meeting and I can say to a client, we can build that or we can do that, and not have to go make 10 phone calls to see if it's possible. Of course, the dirty secret is, even if it's not possible, I still say it is and then make the engineering team do it anyway. But I think that's been a huge advantage for us. It means that I can understand opportunities. So if I'm sitting in a meeting with the engineering team and they're saying, well, hey, wouldn't it be cool if, I can immediately say, because I can speak both sides, I can say, that would be cool but useless, or That would be cool and incredible. Let's patent that and build it. So I feel like having both sides, having the business context and the technical context, makes me a much more versatile entrepreneur in both respects. I think it's also very credible for everyone here to know that I really do understand what it takes to build an enterprise system. And I think our clients and partners and everyone else really do understand that at core, we have to build great technology if we want to succeed as a company. If you look back through all the stories I've told, they're all built on that same line between business and technology.
What would you say to somebody today who is 22 and ambitious and just graduating from college? Would you say they should do the same things, or just think about the time and place when you experienced that? Do you think is different from the landscape today?
Well, the problem with the way I did it was that, failing is very expensive. Ben Franklin has a great quote: "Experience is a dear teacher." Not a good teacher, a dear teacher, meaning expensive, painful, costly. And I think that there were probably ways to get much of the same experience I got without having to burn through friends and family money, without having my best friend fire me. There's probably a way to do it without getting fired so much, I guess is my point. So I think that I would definitely advise anyone who has aspirations to be an entrepreneur to find organizations like that consulting firm or like Right Media, where there's a huge amount of opportunity, access to brilliant people where you're empowered to go learn a lot. You're not a cog in a big wheel. You're actually part of something that is meaningful, where you can get that kind of exposure. So, it doesn't have to be exactly the same series of failures I had, but if you can't fail, you can't learn. So in any role, whether it's at AppNexus or somewhere else, you have to ask the question, how can I fail? Obviously, I don't want anyone at AppNexus to fail big, but you have to have the ability to at least fail a little bit to learn. If there's no risk, there can't be any learning or reward. So that's a critical aspect of any job.
How do you define the environment right now for New York, the startups environment, compared to Valley or LA or some other places?
The question was, how do I see the New York startup environment today versus other places? I've been fortunate in that over the past 10 years, I've been starting companies in New York, and I've seen it change immensely. From 10 years ago, where there was very little seed money in New York, almost no later stage money here, to today, when there's seed money and incubators and a ton of attention and interest from the mayor's office and from pretty much the entire world, looking at New York as a place where you can start great companies. So I think that access to capital has changed dramatically. Access to talent has changed as well. We can now compete with Wall Street for talent. We see engineers taking jobs here instead of the Valley out of school. New York's doing a great job of going to campuses and convincing people to come here after they graduate, not to join a company, but to join this environment. And the truth is that, would you rather live in Menlo Park when you graduate college, or let's say Williamsburg? I personally think that you'll have a lot more fun in Williamsburg than you would in Menlo Park, but nothing against Menlo Park. So I think that's a huge advantage we have, is just from a cultural perspective and from an environment perspective, it's a lot lower risk to come to New York today. That said, we still need a great company or two to be public to really show that you can build a lasting non-niche company here in New York. And so, of course, I aspire for AppNexus to be one of those companies, but there's many other companies here that I think can really put us on the map as a hub. Much like PayPal has the PayPal Mafia, we have the DoubleClick Mafia and the Right Media Mafia and all of that here, but I think one big long-term lasting success would really just be what it takes to make New York truly a lasting special place for startups. And I can only say, don't start a company in LA unless you have a car.
Brian, if you could give Mark Zuckerberg one nugget of advice on that.
Well, I'd say, Mark, stay out of ad tech. Look, it's hard for me to give him advice. He's built a multi-$10 billion company, and he's done an incredible job of scaling the technology and scaling the team. So I think he should be giving me advice, really.
Are you still in good terms with your friend who fired you?
I hate that guy. You've actually met him. Hagos Marat runs tag at AppNexus. So Hagos and I have reconciled. He claims he was absolutely right to fire me. So we agree to disagree on that one point, but we're still best friends, and our kids play together, and we overcame that particular obstacle.
When you're at a startup and you're just at that point where you need to start building enterprise systems that are scalable, what are, say, the 3 biggest factors that you need to consider as one of the 2 tech people in this startup, say?
So one of the things about starting companies today versus even 5 years ago is that you have access to things like the various cloud platforms. So you don't have to worry much about hardware when you think about scaling. But you do kind of have to think, depending on what kind of business you're in, about the trade between redundancy and scalability and agility. At Right Media, our first system, the predictive ad network, ran on 1 data center. And a lot of what it did was take shortcuts because there was no redundancy. Now, if we went down, we were screwed. But at that point, money was very important, and time to code was important. So it was more important to say, hey, yeah, I know this won't scale because I'm relying on millisecond communication between a couple of tiers of the stack, but that's okay. So a lot of this is about knowing when to invest in scaling, and to also think about when to invest in paying down coding debt. So I think a lot about this. At Right Media, I was very into code-first development. So I actually hired a team in Russia to write testing framework for the entire system. At one point, I think we had 10 people in Russia testing the code I was writing every night. So I would go to bed, at like 1 in the morning our time. They would be just arriving at work, and I would do a handoff and say, here's the code I wrote today. Can you please write tests for it? And of course, that didn't work because they would just test the code and it would always pass because the code was the code. So it turned out you have to tell them what you were trying to code, and that would work better. And that was a very expensive project, both financially and in terms of time, but it did mean we had regression tests as we scaled the business. At AppNexus, in our wisdom, when Tivu and I were doing this, we're like, that was a pain in the butt. We're not going to have any bugs this time. Let's not write tests. And it was actually much more fun to code the system because there were no tests. But now we have like an entire team going, damn it, why didn't you guys write tests 5 years ago? So it's one of those things where we sacrificed speed for reliability at Right Media, and it paid off over time. At AppNexus, we were super fast, and then we had to pay down some of the testing debt. It's sort of hard because since we were building much of the same system, we kind of knew what it had to do, and we felt like we knew what we were doing. But when the team was bigger than just us, that no longer worked. So it was just one of those dumb things that I wish I could go back to Brian 5 years ago and be like, boosh! But so far I can't. So that's a couple of things I would think about. I don't think there's any magic bullet, but I would say don't scale too early, don't worry about reliability too early, but don't sacrifice some obvious things like the foundations for what you'll need later. And the scariest thing for any company is that hockey stick moment. It's the moment when, at Right Media we went from $1 billion to $35 billion in 12 months. A lot of that's about how well did you lay the foundation in the beginning, because we had no idea if we were going from 1 to 35 or 1 to 2. So it's a testament to what we'd done that it actually stayed up, although it barely stayed up. So I think that's you want to be on the razor's edge as much as you can.
Can you share something on the role of a mentor or advisor while you were starting up, or you were like too young, straight out of college? How did it play in your overall success?
So the question was, what role did mentors and advisors play in my early days? When we were starting LA Tonight at Princeton, we had a bunch of alumni who were really excited about the .com stuff, and so I had a lot of people helping. And some of those people actually were incredibly successful people who I wish I'd stayed in touch with because I probably would have learned a lot in future experiences. Because I was embarrassed about having been fired from LA Tonight, I actually felt a touch with a number of those people in that process. So I went from having amazing mentors to sort of feeling embarrassed. And that's one thing I regret a lot. Although one did hire me at the consulting firm, I think I shouldn't have felt embarrassed about that. I should have said, hey, I'm going to stay in touch because I'm going to be back starting companies. And so I kind of had to rebuild that network later on. It was also a hard time because from 01 to, say, 04, there was just no entrepreneurship happening. So it wasn't even that sense of a network. Now, all kinds of people are out saying, hey, let me help you build a company. Let me put you in an incubator. So I think that's one of the regrets I have, was not having more people supporting me as I went through those phases. And again, this is something that you can learn from, which is just because you failed doesn't mean you have to make yourself a pariah. Everyone will make a pariah of you just fine. So let them do it. So that's a mistake I think I made early on.
What advice do you have to entrepreneurs who have failed before and who are looking to join a non-realistic sort of getting back into the job force in terms of selling themselves? They just graduated college, did their startup, and maybe failed. From your perspective as a hiring manager, you've been on both sides.
Sure. So the question was, what happens if you've tried starting a company and failed? How would you sort of think about re-entering the job force? And for me at AppNexus, we love failed entrepreneurs. In fact, we've hired a lot because to me, there's no better experience for someone to have had on someone else's dime than failure. So if you want to fail somewhere else and then come work for us with all the stuff you've learned, that would be awesome. So definitely talk to us. But I think in general, you want to work at a company that has that attitude. So in a sense, it will self-select. If you say, look, I took a risk, I tried this, and it wasn't successful, but I learned these things, focus on what you've learned, and focus on the free failure they're getting as opposed to on, what an idiot I was. And again, that's about me making myself a pariah. You're not a pariah, at least in this country, if you fail. In fact, you're brave if you fail. And the fact that you can now go learn something else, as a hire, as a manager, if someone can say, look, I'm coming to this company because I believe in your mission and your purpose, because I think it's a really awesome place, and I want to learn these 5 or 6 things because this is what I need next in my career, that's pretty powerful. We may not have those things, but it's a very strong way to start a job relationship, I think. And most companies should be very interested in that.
I'd rather fail on somebody else's dime than on my own. Is there a trade-off to that?
Say it again?
I'd rather fail on somebody else's dime than on my own.
Oh, failing on someone else's dime as opposed to your own? Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a lot cheaper. Right?
Is there a disadvantage to that?
No, I can't think of any disadvantages. I mean, from my perspective, if you can find someone else to give you a dime to fail on, heck yeah. I think if you're honest about it, the key is to be honest about it. Is if you say, look, when we were raising money for AppNexus, I was clear to people like, I've never not been fired or huffed off, and this is my first time as a CEO, and I really truly believe we can build a great company, but you're going to take a bet that I can be a great CEO. And that's still an open bet. No one's really actually sold that I am a great CEO or that I could ever be one, but at least I was honest. And I think that's the key. If you walk in and say, I know what I'm doing, I'm going to kill it, this is a no-brainer, and then you fail, then it's somewhat hard to feel good about that. But if you say, look, I have a great idea, or I have a really good team and plan and whatever, most angel investors and VCs and people like that know that most of their deals are going to fail. So you should have no concerns as long as it's a fair trade and everyone's being honest and upfront with each other. I think that's a great way to learn. And that, by the way, doesn't have to be raising money. It could be working at a company. Being in a stretch role as an employee is still another way to succeed or fail on someone else's dime. I still see that as an incredibly important way to learn. Is I'm going to go learn how to be a great salesperson by working somewhere, and then I'll start my business or go out to do something new.
The reason I'm asking is that I work for a lot of startups that fail. So I get to watch other people make mistakes and learn from them.
Yeah, I like watching people fail too. I think we all do. So, and there's nothing wrong with it. Thank God for America, right? Like, failure is kind of fun.
And there's a lot to be said about walking away from the whole situation and being able to sleep at night.
That's true. I read a stat that in the college basketball tournament, over half the companies lose, half the teams lose. Something like 63 out of the 64 teams lose in March Madness. It's amazing, these stats. So it's pretty depressing, but there is one team that wins. So that's how I feel about failure.
So you talked about failing on in your own experiences and starting your own businesses. But are there any other failures of other people? Maybe you have mentors or anything like that have inspired you as well?
That's a great question. So what other failures have inspired me? Recently I was reading the biography of Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson, an amazing book. And Steve Jobs is an incredibly failed leader, businessman, human being. But you read about it, and in some ways, I mean, you just see this inspiring truth of a person who can have so many failings and failures and still be seen as an incredible success. And I think that I read everything I can find about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, and there's just story after story of people who have failed and learned and failed and learned. If you read Steve Blank's columns, he talks so much about how he just, customer development, his entire thesis is in essence about failing your way to success. So to me, all failure is inspirational as long as you can learn from it and bounce back from it. And almost every great entrepreneur has a failure story. And in fact, one thing about Zuckerberg that sort of pisses me off is, right out of college, doesn't even graduate, and the thing's incredibly successful. Why couldn't he fail 3 or 4 more times so we could learn something from him? But recently, actually, I'll say the most recent failure that I'm sort of frightened of is Andrew Mason and Groupon. A guy in his early 30s, first-time CEO, rocket ship startup, does a lot of things right, has great mentors and great people around him, and gets canned by the board because of many reasons, but because he just wasn't ready for that next step. What do we learn from that story? One is don't go public, right? But then again, you have to go public at some point. But Steve Jobs got fired. You know who fired Steve Jobs if you read that book? What venture firm? A guy named Arthur Rock from Venrock. Go to the Venrock website, scroll down to Apple. The next company alphabetically is AppNexus. So let's see. Venrock fired Steve Jobs. So if I get fired by Venrock, I will just say it's pretty cool to be fired alphabetically next after Steve Jobs, right? I will put that on my wall after I cry for a while. But I think, look, we have to look at that and learn from it. I hope everyone here is watching these stories and saying, look, Andrew Mason is an incredible entrepreneur. He's a 12,000 person company worth billions of dollars that has potentially changed local commerce forever. Part of me wants to call him up. I'll give him a couple weeks and say, hey, what did you learn? And how can I not get fired? Because it really matters a lot to me, but I think to all of us is to say, what are we all going to learn as an ecosystem? What does this mean about hiring COOs? He had a hard time hiring a strong operational team. What does it mean about the IPO process? There's all these interesting dynamics about Andrew Mason that I'm sure we'll all read about for a long time. And he won't be the last fired CEO of this era or the last person we learn from. But I have a huge amount of respect for him, and I will just say that's not in any way negative. It's actually an opportunity to learn from a failure/success like Groupon.
So you mentioned you read a lot about entrepreneurship. Of all the things that you've read, which handful of books have you think have had the most impact on your career?
Well, my favorite book, as anyone at AppNexus knows, is The 4 Steps to the Epiphany by Steve Blank, which I've never actually read. Because every time I start reading it, I get to like a certain page, I'm like, oh my God, I have to go do this. This is amazing. And I'll go run off and do it, and and I'll try to pick it up again and read it, and I'll get like another 10. I'm like, oh my God, this is brilliant, this is brilliant. And so I've never actually made it cover to cover from this book, because it's just too good. So I really love that book. And he's also written some more stuff that I just think is really amazing, because he's taken what we all think of as the way companies work, with a product function and a sales function, and you build product and you sell it, and flipped it on its head, which resonates with me so many ways about how we have to actually go find customers and then build for them. And that's really built deeply into everything I've ever done, and I think it's truly amazing. So I really like that. There's a couple other books that I think are really, at least for me, have been powerful at different stages of my career. So there's a bunch of books about like solution selling that I found really powerful back when I was starting to learn to sell to enterprises, really understanding enterprises as, people of different types. It's not like you call the CFO and say, buy it. He's going to immediately say, well, talk to my controller. Well, what does that mean? And there's not any one way to do it, but thinking about who's the decision maker versus the influencers versus the people with it's just systematically thinking about organizations and how to sell into them have been really powerful for me. There's a book called Positioning, which is a classic, which I remember reading at one point and just going, kind of like the Steve Blank book, like, I get it, So just, it's funny, like, it's what book you need at the time. Like, whatever you're currently struggling with or banging your head against that really is motivating. But to be honest, I read a lot of fiction because at some point, living and breathing this all the time, it's fun to read like something less serious. So, if you see me on an airplane, I'll probably be, you'll see me with a business book in my bag, but I'll be reading something fun. Pretending like I'm going to read that book soon. It's more or less how I do it. All right, any more? All right, thank you all so much for coming. Really appreciate it. I'll be outside to answer questions. Thanks.